Welcome to our deep dive today. Looks like we're taking a look at On Writing Well by William Zinsser. So, are you a writer yourself or just interested in what makes writing tick?
Or maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, exactly. Well, either way, we're going to uncover some serious wisdom. This book, it's helped countless people write better nonfiction. It's like a classic for a reason, right?
Absolutely. It's practically rite of passage for writers. And, what's so fascinating is how relevant it remains, even in our digital age. I mean, think
Mhm.
about it. Zinsser focuses on the core principles of good writing: clarity, conciseness, engaging your audience. That's timeless stuff,
Yeah.
applicable to everything from, well, you name it.
Emails, blog posts, even scientific papers. He really hits on that, doesn't he? Especially that bit about how technology hasn't necessarily made us better writers, even though it's made writing easier.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just fire off an email without giving it much thought.
Oh, tell me about it. Hit send and instantly regret it. But Zinsser, he reminds us that the essence of writing is rewriting. That really resonated with me.
He has a point, doesn't he? It's tempting to think the first draft is good enough, especially with all the tools we have these days. But good writers, they don't settle. They revise, refine, almost like sculpting their words.
Yeah.
And it's not just about fixing typos, it's about clarifying ideas,
Hmm.
making sure that you're really connecting with your reader.
It's like he's saying you have to be willing to really work at it, to chisel away at those sentences until they're sharp and to the point.
Exactly. And that leads us to another one of Zinser's big points: cutting out clutter. You know, he has a real distaste for inflated language and jargon.
Oh, yeah. That part where he talks about the airline pilot who announces experiencing considerable precipitation.
Right. Instead of just saying it may rain, it's almost
Mm.
comical, but it illustrates his point perfectly.
It does make you wonder, though, why do people use that kind of language? Is it to sound more important or is it just a bad habit?
It's probably a mix of both. Sometimes it's intentional, trying to sound more authoritative, professional, but often I think it's unintentional. People get so used to using jargon in their field that they forget it might not be accessible to everyone. Have you ever noticed that in your own line of work?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the tech world,
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like folks are intentionally trying to make things sound more complicated than they need to be.
It's like they think using more complex language makes their ideas seem more important. But as Zinsser points out, it's actually the opposite. When you write simply and clearly, your ideas are going to shine through. It's like clearing away the fog to reveal a stunning landscape.
That's a great way to put it. So, simplifying our language, that's a key step. But is there more to it than just using simpler words?
There is. Zinsser also talks about writing in a natural conversational style. He actually says, never say anything in writing that you wouldn't comfortably say in conversation. It's about letting your personality come through, making your writing feel authentic and engaging.
That makes sense. But how do you balance that authenticity with the need to be professional, especially in certain types of writing?
That's a great question. It's not about being unprofessional. It's about finding that balance between formality and your own natural voice. Think
Yeah.
about it. If you were giving a presentation, you wouldn't want to sound like a robot reading a script. You'd want to connect with your audience on a human level. Well, writing's no different.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your personality can shine through without sacrificing clarity or professionalism.
Exactly. And one way to achieve that: vivid details. Zinsser talks about how specific details can bring your writing to life, make it more memorable. He uses some interesting examples in the book, like the description of Burley Grimes' slippery elm bark in the Baseball Hall of Fame, for instance. What do you think he's trying to illustrate with that example?
Well, it's not just the quirkiness of it, right? It's piece of bark. It's about choosing details that capture the reader's imagination. Think about it. If someone were to describe a baseball player's locker, who cares? But a piece of bark used to soothe blisters. Now, that's a detail that stays with you.
Absolutely. It's not just about being descriptive. It's about choosing details that have a purpose, that reveal something unexpected or interesting.
So it's about being observant, really paying attention to those little details that often go unnoticed.
You got it. And using those details to create a richer, more engaging experience for the reader. And this attention to detail is particularly important when it comes to interviewing, which Zinsser also discusses in the book.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
is. He really dives into how crucial it is for nonfiction writers, getting those firsthand accounts, fresh perspectives. And he talks about preparing, asking those open-ended questions, active listening.
It sounds like there's a lot more to it than just showing up with a list of questions.
Absolutely. It's about capturing the essence of your subject, their authentic voice, not just their words, but really understanding their perspective.
So, how do you even go about doing that? I mean, are there any techniques or anything specific Zinsser recommends?
Well, one thing he really stresses, being present, really being in the moment. He actually kind of discourages getting too caught up in the tech stuff, even if you're recording. He suggests taking notes by hand, staying engaged in the moment.
That's interesting. It's easy to get distracted by fiddling with the recorder or trying to get every word down perfectly. But if you're not truly present, you might miss those little nuances that make an interview really come alive.
Exactly. Speaking of capturing authentic voices, there's this story Zinsser tells about an appraiser, R.S. Timewell, his name was. He was helping this elderly woman sell some furniture to raise some funds. They went through most of the house, but nothing seemed valuable. And just as Timewell's about to give up, the woman mentions a maid's room she hadn't shown him.
Ooh, what was in the maid's room?
Tucked away in this maid's room, they found a beautiful 18th century chest.
Wow.
Turns out the woman had been using it to store blankets.
No way.
Yeah. And when Timewell told her it could be worth a small fortune, you know what she said. But that's impossible. Where will I store my blankets?
That's hilarious. It reminds me of what Zinsser says about finding that human element in every story, even if the topic seems, kind of dry or technical at first. There's always a human connection to be found.
It really is all about perspective. Even something like, the history of an institution or the installation of storm sewers, it can be fascinating if you approach it with the right mindset. It's about finding those details, those moments of humor or even pathos that resonate with readers.
And I imagine that's where a good organization comes in, because you could have all those great details, those compelling interviews, but if the piece isn't structured well, it's going to fall apart.
You're right. Zinsser, he really emphasizes thinking in terms of paragraphs. Each paragraph like a unit with its own content and structure. He actually compares it to building a house. You need a solid foundation, well-defined rooms for it to stand strong.
So we've talked about rewriting, eliminating clutter, write naturally, using vivid details, mastering the art of the interview, and organizing our thoughts. Is there anything else that really jumps out at you as relevant for writers today?
One thing that really stood out to me, especially in our current social climate, is Zinsser's advice on avoiding sexism in language.
Oh, that's an important one. Words have such power in how we perceive the world, how we see each other.
Exactly. It's not just about being politically correct. It's about recognizing how language can perpetuate stereotypes. He really emphasizes the importance of choosing words that are inclusive and respectful.
So being mindful of the messages we're sending through our language.
Yes. And Zinsser, he gives some practical tips, like using gender-neutral terms, avoiding constructions that default to the masculine. It's a good reminder that good writing goes beyond grammar and mechanics. It's about ethics and intention, too.
That's a great point. So how do you apply these principles to something like, say, science writing? Because Zinsser also talks about the challenge of making complex topics accessible to a wider audience.
He does. And one technique he highlights is the power of starting with a concrete, relatable detail to draw the reader in. For example, he mentions an article that starts with a chimpanzee playing tic-tac-toe.
That chimpanzee playing tic-tac-toe doesn't sound very scientific.
Right, but that's exactly the point. It's a simple, engaging image that anyone can grasp. And then the article gradually delves into a complex study about analyzing brain waves and predicting behavior.
Hmm.
It's like creating a bridge for the reader to cross into that more challenging territory.
So it's like, explain it to me like I'm 5, but in a way that respects the reader's intelligence.
Exactly. It's about breaking down complex information, building a foundation of understanding, then moving on to those more nuanced concepts. And he provides another great example with an article about bats and their echolocation.
Now, how do you make echolocation sound exciting?
The writer cleverly personifies the bats, describing them as spending their whole lives yelling at their loved ones, their enemies, even their dinner.
That's great. It takes a concept that could sound dry or technical and makes it relatable, almost funny.
And that really speaks to a larger point that Zinsser makes. Write like a person, not like a scientist. He points to writers like Rachel Carson and Charles Darwin, scientists who were also gifted storytellers. They found ways to make their subjects come alive, even for those without a scientific background.
So it's not just simplifying the language, it's about bringing that passion, that sense of wonder and excitement. And I bet that applies to all kinds of nonfiction, not just science.
Absolutely. It's about finding those human connections, the moments of truth and beauty that make any subject matter compelling. And speaking of different genres, Zinsser also delves into sports writing, which he argues often falls into, well, a bit of a rut with cliches and tired language.
That's true. A lot of sports writing can feel formulaic and predictable. So, how does he suggest breaking free from those conventions?
He really emphasizes finding fresh, original ways to capture the drama and the excitement of the game. He praises writers like Red Smith, who managed to avoid those cliches and really bring a sense of immediacy and energy to their writing.
I bet that's not easy, especially when you're writing about something that's been covered countless times before.
It's about those unique details, those human moments. He mentions an article about a race car driver experiencing those intense G-forces. Instead of just stating the facts, the writer describes how the driver's face distends in that first second of acceleration, giving him this ghostly smile.
Whoa, that's vivid. It's like
Yeah,
you're right there in the car.
exactly. And that's the power of good sports writing. It transports you to the heart of the action, makes you feel those emotions of the game.
It seems like there's a common thread here running through all these different types of writing, whether it's science, sports, whatever it is. It's about finding those details, those specific details that capture the essence of the subject and connect with the reader.
Absolutely. It's about moving beyond the generic, finding those moments of truth, those moments of humanity that make the writing really sing. And Zinsser makes this interesting distinction between a critic and a reviewer.
Oh, yeah. He talks about that in the book. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that? What's the difference?
He suggests that reviewers, they primarily report on a particular industry,
Hmm.
providing summaries, basic information for the average consumer. They're telling you what the new TV series is about, whether a movie is appropriate for kids, if that new cookbook will actually teach you how to make a decent chocolate mousse. It's a valuable service, sure, but it's not necessarily in-depth analysis.
So, more of an overview than a critical interpretation of the work.
Right. Critics, on the other hand, they go deeper. They're making judgments, offering those insights and interpretations that can really enhance our understanding of the art form. Exploring historical context, analyzing symbolism, deconstructing techniques.
Do you have any examples of critics whose work you admire?
One that comes to mind is Pauline Kael, known for her wit and her insights about film. Zinsser actually quotes a passage where she contrasts Meryl Streep's chameleon-like acting, how she transforms for every role, with the core identity projected by those old Hollywood stars like Bette Davis.
Interesting. Makes you think about how acting styles have changed and what that says about our culture. Right.
Exactly. And Kael, she was great at capturing those nuances, connecting them to bigger cultural trends. Another critic Zinsser mentions is Michael J. Arlen, who wrote about television in the 60s. He had this brilliant column about the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow. I'd be curious to hear more about that. How did he approach such a sensitive topic?
Well, he used the metaphor of a child looking through a peehole to describe how TV presented this limited view of the war. He argued that viewers were just given glimpses like an elbow, a man's jacket, part of a face, a woman's face. She is crying, one sees the tears.
Wow, that's powerful. It really highlights how the medium can shape our perception of reality, especially with something as complex as war.
Right, it's a great example of how criticism isn't just about evaluating. It's about those bigger questions, about the media, about how we consume information, those ethical implications.
So, using criticism as a tool for critical thinking, for challenging our assumptions and broadening our perspectives.
Exactly. And Zinsser also points out good criticism, well, it should be entertaining in its own right. He quotes a passage from Virgil Thompson, a music critic, who takes aim at Toscanini's conducting style. He accuses him of using this wow technique just to hold the audience's attention, even if it means sacrificing musical integrity.
So, even when you're critiquing, you still want to be engaging, maybe even a bit humorous.
Absolutely. After all, you want your readers to enjoy the journey, even if they don't necessarily agree with your assessment. And speaking of enjoyment, Zinsser devotes a whole section to humor writing, which he argues is often misunderstood.
Oh, that's interesting. What does he have to say about humor writing?
He points out that many people see humorists as, well, entertainers, but their work can tackle some really serious issues. Think about those comedians who use satire to comment on politics or injustice. They make us laugh, but they're also prompting us to think critically. They do. And Zinsser highlights several humorists who have made, well, significant contributions. From Mark Twain to Dorothy Parker, he talks about how their work often challenged conventions, sparked those conversations, and sometimes even led to real change.
It's amazing how humor can be a force for change like that. But I imagine it takes a lot of skill to craft humor that's both funny and meaningful.
It does. Zinsser emphasizes that good humor writing, Well, it still needs those strong writing fundamentals. You need clarity, precision, that understanding of how language works. He even taught a course on humor writing at Yale.
Wow, a course on humor writing. I bet that was a popular class. What were some of the key takeaways? Any advice for aspiring humor writers?
He encouraged them to, experiment, try different forms, satire, parody, observational comedy, and he really emphasized finding your own voice and style, just like with any other type of writing.
So it's not just about telling jokes, it's about finding that unique way to express your humor, something that feels authentic and engaging.
Exactly. Zinsser also talks about this idea of enjoyment in writing. He really encourages writers to find joy in the process, approach their work with a sense of playfulness and confidence. He believed when you enjoy what you're doing, it shows in the writing.
That's a great point. It's easy to get bogged down in the challenges of writing, but remembering to have fun can make such a difference. Did Zinsser ever talk about his own process, where he found inspiration and that sort of thing?
He does. He shares a story about how his father, a successful businessman, really instilled in him this strong work ethic and this belief in the importance of quality. He talks about how those values shaped his approach to writing, pushed him to strive for excellence.
It's amazing how early influences can have such an impact on our paths. Now, before we wrap up, I did want to touch on one more thing that Zinsser addresses: the relationship between a writer and an editor. He talks about it being this collaborative process built on trust and respect.
Absolutely. He stresses how important it is for writers to stand up for their work, to protect their voice, their vision. He actually mentions buying back articles from magazines when they made changes he couldn't accept.
Wow, that's really standing up for your work. It shows how much he valued the integrity of his writing.
He did. And he also emphasizes clear communication between the writer and the editor. He believes an editor's main responsibility is to, well, make sure the writing is clear and accessible as possible.
So it's a balance, isn't it? Preserving the writer's voice, but also ensuring the piece is as strong as it can be.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance, but when it works, you end up with a piece that's both true to the writer's vision and polished to perfection.
Well, we've covered a lot today, haven't we? We've explored some really essential writing principles: the power of rewriting, clear language, the art of interviewing, finding your voice.
It's been a fascinating look at Zinsser's work, and I think his insights are incredibly valuable for anyone who wants to improve their writing, no matter what level they're at.
I totally agree. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into On Writing Well, I want to leave you with one final thought from Zinsser. He says, writing is related to character. If your values are sound, your writing will be sound. It all begins with intention. So, I ask you, what is your intention with your writing? What message do you want to leave with your reader? Something to think about as you continue your own writing journey.
And remember, no matter what you're writing, an email, a blog post, a scientific paper, even a quick note, good writing is about clear thinking, empathy, and connecting with your audience. So go forth and write well, and never forget, the first draft is just the beginning. The real magic happens in the rewriting.